Hi, and welcome to Purposeful Woman podcast. And today we have Alysha Myronuk, and she is an intuitive and creator of Myrony, which stands for My Irony, which are the crazy coincidences that happens in life that we can't explain. Thanks to some very dark times, Alysha connected to her psychic gifts that she calls her spiritual spidey sense. She also hosts of That Is My Myrony podcast plus My Myrony mentoring, where she uses her psychic gifts of knowing to help her clients through intuitive soul sessions. Hi and welcome, Alysha.
Hi, Victoria. Thank you so much for having me today. And I have to say, my last name is actually pronounced Myronuk. So everyone gets to have these Myronic experiences, just not the way I spell my last name. That's
Yeah,
Myrony.
that is my irony of having Alysha, right? My Ronic last name. And I would love to hear your story. I know that it's a just amazing story. How did you create that beautiful word?
Well, it is a crazy story of how I came up with the word. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that there was this universal word for everyone. And so my story started back almost 17 years ago when I was born, engaged, and married in the same hospital. How does that happen? My father was terminally ill and he was in hospice care in the hospital, and I wasn't engaged at the time. And the story, for people who want to hear it, they can go to my podcast, That's Myrony, and listen to the first episode that goes into greater detail. But I basically was married in 6 days. Then my dad passed away 1 week later. And then my marriage really fell apart less than a year later after buying a restaurant. And also, I had to see my ex every single day. And it was devastating and very crazy story. Anybody wants to hear the drama of it, again, listen to that episode. But that was actually one of the greatest gifts of my life, because I discovered I have medium abilities, and I was able to tap into my father's energy and being able to connect from that higher perspective. What makes it more interesting is my mom was able to do the same thing. And it was so powerful when, because sometimes you think you're going crazy, but when you have somebody else being able to do it, makes you not feel so crazy, right? And I would notice numbers and I would notice these signs all the time. And when my life was falling like just out of control, I would just recognize these coincidences. But there really are no coincidences, right? So my biggest irony was that my life really fell apart. I tried to commit suicide, but then I kept pulling myself to this higher perspective because I was being able to connect to this higher perspective. And the irony was, my friend who took my wedding pictures ended up giving me this book the day before she moved away, Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. And that book literally saved my life. And that was what allowed me to look at everything from this, keep looking from this higher perspective. So I can't say my life was what was easy from that moment on. A lot of trials and tribulations. I kind of say my higher self was masochist at times. But the funny thing is that I did end up recognizing that everything I went through was truly a gift. I realized I had to go back to being Myronic, because my married name was not that, and so that I could bring Myrony to the world. So you may wonder, how did Myrony come about? It was because, how do you say your last name? I would say it's like ironic, but with an M. And then I would add, there's a lot of Myrony in my life. And I get a little chuckle. And then one day I realized this incredible like aha moment was when I was like, oh my goodness, this is a universal word for everyone. My irony. Take out the I, Myrony. But Myrony, why you take out the I is because it's not about I, it's about we and something so much greater. And so Myrony are the crazy coincidences that happen in life we can't explain. It's another word for sign or synchronicity. However, it's a little bit more modern day word for synchronicity. However, I believe it has its own definition because it's synchronicity in motion. You may see a sign, but then there's an action you can take. Usually, when you trust that inner knowing, you get some sort of gut reaction. And there really is something more that we can do in a lot of cases. Whether it's just telling a story that you're like, oh, that's funny. And then you continue this conversation because it's usually about connecting with people. I believe Myrony brought us together, Viktoriia. So, and Myrony is something, it's literally the opposite of selfie, and creating a movement for people to share their Myronies in addition to their selfies on social media. So we have a new form of content to share because I believe we can all connect this way also. That's a little bit about Myrony.
Yeah, so I love this concept of posting Myronies instead of selfies because that will give us a little bit burst of inspiration and bring attention to those who are not paying attention to all this cool Myronies going on around us. Oh, so I would love to ask you, you've gone through such a just a huge journey of a lot of adversities and being born and married at the same hospital and having your relationship just break apart and everything that is brought us together now here. But what would you do differently if you like everything that you know right now, let's take like 5 years ago, what would you tell yourself, your old self?
Well, really, it comes down to the situation where I didn't trust my intuition. And I literally was shown every sign from above. This was actually within the first year of everything that kind of fell apart in my life. And I didn't trust this intuition that literally was this, I believe, like this chance moment. And I swear, every single sign was saying, don't go. I was going to this party, and it was like, don't go to this party. Even my navigation wouldn't take me there. And instead of paying attention to the external signs, I chose not to listen to my internal navigation. And I learned from that moment on to never go against that. And that is really the biggest. If there's one thing I can say to the listeners, is always trust your that inner knowing. That inner knowing, how many times have you gone against that and then you later regret your decision? So what if you just start living from that place more than anything?
Yeah, and that will lead us to our last question, which is what advice would you give yourself? It's kind of the same thing, but it's different.
Yeah, well, but it is the same in the sense that always trust that inner knowing. There's the one of the things that I've really tapped into is that I have this gift of inner knowing known as claircognizance. I learned it from the book The Light Between Us. Psychic medium Laura Lynn Jackson was the one that I had ever heard of. That I've heard of all the other psychic gifts, but I never knew that one. I was like, oh my goodness, that's what I have. But the irony of that is that I kept seeing the word Jackson for like a year before I was introduced to that book. And I'm like, why do I keep seeing Jackson? So, one of the things I would say again to listeners is just pay attention to those things that just keep showing up. If you see a number sequence and you're like, what is up with that? Maybe that's your sign. It's whatever connects to you. If you hear a song playing on, playing and you're like, oh, that sounds like it's speaking to me. It could be. I see signs and license plates all the time. I believe Myronies are like these little spiritual breadcrumbs. Sometimes it's the smallest crumb that ends up having the greatest impact. So just pay attention, and literally miracles in your life and in others will appear.
I love it. Yes, it's like universe is speaking to us through signs and it doesn't speak through us through words. It will like you get to pay attention to it. And the last question is, it's not a question, but I want you to fill it up the blank in a sentence. If you really knew me, you will know that I am.
Oh, wow. If you really knew me, you would know that I am. That's a hard one, Viktoriia. That's a really hard one. I guess I would say like a kind soul.
You are a kind soul.
Yeah, who
I
just
will
wants to
confirm
help
that.
people. I just want to help people who feel lost.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and share with us how our audience can find you and can learn more about Myronies. And
Oh, wonderful. Well, my podcast is That's Myrony, and my website is that'smyrony.com. And so you can connect there, connect on, Instagram and Facebook. It's pretty easy to find me. Alysha Myronuk is there's no other name like that out there. So love to hear if there's anybody's Myronies. And I also do something called intuitive soul sessions. So you can find that at my website under My Myrony Mentoring, which I help people who do feel lost unlock the blocks in their life.
beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in the next episode. And always don't forget, I would love for you to text us to +1 401 399 4105 your Myronies and your stories. I would love to hear them. All right, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye, everybody. And if you love this episode and you would love to see more of that, click the subscribe button to Purposeful Woman Podcast. And don't forget to text us to stay in tune with the Purposeful community for awesome tricks by texting to number +1 401 399 4105. And we will link descriptions in the episode to all of that we mentioned today. Bye. Turn your one day to day one with a purposeful day.